And we have the privilege and the honor of having with us Lynn Good, President and CEO of Duke Energy, and it's just a fabulous, fabulous event. So a big applause, and thank you, Duke, and thank you, Lynn, for being here today. I introduce to you, with great pleasure, Gary Mignona, Areva Inc. North American President and CEO.
Well, hello. This is really a fantastic turnout for folks to come and listen to Lynn Good. Lynn is very impressive. I've worked with Lynn with NEI, Nuclear Energy Institute. She's certainly one of the most influential leaders in the energy industry, in the top 10, according to SNL Energy, but actually my interface with her and listening to her influence, you know, it's more like maybe in the top 2. Fortune named her one of the 13 most influential business women in the U.S. I don't know why they had to genderize it. Actually, she's probably 13th person influential in the U.S. So it's just really a pleasure for us to be here and hear from Lynn today. You know, she started her career as an auditor. She moved to Synergy in 2003. Synergy and Duke merged, so she came to Duke in 2006 with that merger. And in that very short time, from 2006 until now, she's risen in the ranks, going through the commercial energy business, becoming CFO, becoming CEO, and the board has so much confidence in her. She's now also chairman of the board. Usually you have the chairman looking over the shoulder of the CEO to keep him straight. Well, Lynn's looking over her own shoulder now and keeping Duke Energy straight. So, you know, and I talked to some of Lynn's people, you know, what makes Lynn so good? And most of the people I deal with are engineers because we're in the, sort of the technical end of this business. And they said, you know, she may be a finance person, but we think she's a closet engineer. Because anytime we explain something to her technical, she gets it right away. She makes a link to something else we did last year, finds the discrepancies, and can really find that nugget on how to keep us improving. And that's very impressive. So, Lynn, without any further ado, I'd like for you to come up to the stage.
Thank you so much. What a gracious introduction. And John and Michael Good will be pleased that they were part of that introduction, my 2 college-age sons. So it's great to be here, and I'm delighted to join all of you today for a conversation about energy, and really delighted to be a part of an organization that recognizes the importance of bringing people together to talk about worldwide issues. We're really blessed here in Charlotte to have a global approach to energy, and I think about Areva and the extraordinary impact that they've had on this region. Siemens is here. We've got a cluster forming, UNC Charlotte, with their research around energy. I know EPIC is represented here. And E4 Carolinas, who wakes up every day trying to figure out how to make energy a more important part of this region. And I think we would all agree that the interconnectedness of the world is just increasing over time and increasing at a rapid pace. The world is really much smaller than what we might have experienced when we began our career 20, 30, or 40 years ago. Just look at the stock market yesterday. Concern over global weakness and growth. Oil prices, 13-year low, we're all talking about that. It's just a key illustration of how global we all are and how we're impacted by things going on around the world. And it's certainly the case in the energy business. And I'm going to bring that big word energy down to the big word but smaller word power and electricity, because that's the space I live in, and it also is being impacted in a great way around the world. But what I thought I would do to set your minds at ease before we go on the global trip is to let you know that we are preparing for a storm here in the Carolinas. Anyone who's watching the weather says, I hope Duke is going to keep the football game working on Sunday night, right? Okay, all right. I thought I would preempt a Panther question. You must know that we have crews coming from Florida and the Midwest, and we are monitoring hour by hour what's happening. Ice is the scariest thing for us, and I know for many of you who experienced that ice storm earlier in the decade, so we're watching it closely, and my hope is we weather this storm well. Our commitment to reliability, as you all know, is paramount. So I thought what I would do in the topic of power is I would start first and talk a little bit about power on the global stage, talk a little bit about the U.S. and national issues, and then bring it home to Duke Energy in the Carolinas, because I think there are dimensions to this conversation at every level. And so if we start at the global stage, I'd just like you to take a moment with me and acknowledge or think about the transformative power of electricity. And anyone who's experienced a power outage for an extended period and the anxiety and the fear and other things that come from that, you realize what an incredible gift we have with electrification here in the U.S. Often we take it for granted. You know, we flip the switch, on come the lights. Not all of us understand what it takes to make that happen, but we have been blessed with an extraordinary electric system. And as you think about, the importance of electrification, it lights the night. It warms us when it's cold. It refrigerates our food. It is what allows us to communicate. It's one of the reasons the world is smaller, because we've electrified so much of it. And it is so essential to the lives of a population, a community, and the economies of the world that we count on, that it's something that we really cannot take for granted. And when you think about electricity and the conversation that we often have about it around the world, it has to do with providing those essential services to people. And it has to do with growing an economy. And how can we electrify a country in order to grow that economy? And then increasingly, the conversation has another dimension to it. And that is, how do we continue to improve environmental responsibility? And how do we address something as important as carbon as we think about modernization of electric infrastructure around the world? And I would suggest to you that the complexity of that topic on a worldwide stage goes far beyond bringing countries together in Paris to discuss it. It's an important step, and a lot of progress was made. But when you think about how the world is situated around the issue of electricity, it's really complicated. So let's think about developing countries and the fact that over 1 billion people today do not have electricity. None. And a like number or more have reliability that is less than what we enjoy here in the U.S. And you think about China or in India, those are the most often quoted, but I was speaking with a gentleman thinking about Africa, so much electrification to go on. And you think about over the next 10 or 15 or 20 years, how much infrastructure will be built around the world to address electrification. And I had some statistics about just building capacity to generate electricity. Over the period from 2005 to 2013, China's capacity grew by 82.5%. The U.S. grew by 0.2%. Over the period through 2025, we expect China to grow again by 75%. And renewables will be a part of that, but so will nuclear, and so will coal, as we think about resources that would be used to accomplish that degree of electrification. And so on a global stage, when you add that economic growth and how are we going to address environment, for a developing country, you can appreciate the complexity of what that represents. For the developed world, there are also challenges. Of course, we have decades of infrastructure that we've built. We have stable electricity, and here in the U.S., great, low-cost, 99% reliable electricity. But the challenge that the developed countries experience is really similar in some ways, in that we also care about economic growth. We also care about the price of electricity. And we also care about the fact that the capital investment required to modernize is going to be extraordinary. And in developed countries, the usage of electricity is not growing. Top-line growth, very slow. That puts a lot of economic pressure on those who need to invest to modernize and spend the capital necessary to go forward. So I'm delighted with the conversation on a global scale about power and electrification. But I think as you peel back the layers of the onion on the complexity of that topic, we're talking about an issue to be solved over decades. And we're also talking about an issue that's going to be solved country by country, region by region, based on the resources, the trade-offs, the investment, and the other decisions that those countries will make. And so what I'd like to do is transition to what's going on in the U.S. How is the U.S. positioned for modernization and transformation of our electric infrastructure? And I must say, and I'm a partisan, of course, I'm very proud of the electric infrastructure in the U.S. I'm proud of the fact that we have one of the most reliable, affordable infrastructures in the world. I'm proud of the fact that we've been modernizing it for several decades. And I look at the history and track record of Duke Energy. On the scale of carbon emissions, we are down 22% since 2005. On the scale of carbon-free generation, you may not know this statistic, but about 40% of the energy that you consume in the Carolinas is carbon-free. It's from nuclear. And I know States Lee is here. I had a chance to visit with many who knew Bill Lee. Extraordinary investments made in the Carolinas on carbon-free generation, and nuclear is still an important part of what we do. Reliability, 99.9%. And pricing here in the Carolinas, 20 to 30% below national average. Renewables are being built, and being built all over the U.S. So I think about that extraordinary foundation of electric infrastructure that we have. It's a great place to build from, and to think about a future of modernization and low carbon, even lower carbon than what we've accomplished today. But I have to raise that, on the other hand, the U.S. does not have national energy policy. We do not have a coordinated approach that we have come together in the U.S. around to say, how are we going to take it from here? Where are we going to go from here? And when I think about that energy policy, what I'm talking about is who is wrestling with the question of what role nuclear is going to play? Who's wrestling with the question of natural gas? Is it a bridge fuel, which some believe it is, or is it something we ought to be planning as the backbone of our infrastructure with other resources and technologies around it? Are we going to close all of our coal plants? And if so, over what time frame? And what impact is that going to have on the economy? Property taxes in most of the states in the U.S. are influenced heavily by generation assets. And we've had the unpleasant task of going to a school board and telling them that the plant is closing, and there goes the property tax base for that region. There are ripple effects from these decisions that we want to wrestle with. Renewables. Renewables, prices are coming down, extraordinary research, a lot of promise, a lot of innovation and technology. How many of them are we going to build? Are we going to build them in places where they are more economic? It's very windy in Wyoming and Texas. It's not as windy in other parts. It's very sunny in certain states, not sunny in all states all the time. That affects the economics of those resources. And if we build them everywhere, are we willing to undertake the investment of transmission to put that power where it needs to go, where people live? Speaking from experience, building transmission is difficult. Anyone who's watched Duke try to build transmission in the last 6 months, you appreciate how hard it is to cite things of that sort. And if we're not going to tackle some of those big questions, are we waiting for a technological innovation that's going to occur sometime over the next 20 or 30 years that's going to make it all work perfectly? And if so, are we putting too many chits on that bet? Because I would suggest what we're gambling with here is the electric infrastructure of the U.S. And I'm taking you back to how extraordinarily important that infrastructure is to power the lives of communities, but also to power the industry that we all count on to vitalize our communities. So, a lot going on in the U.S., but I would suggest to you again, just like global, big issue, ground game is country by country. In the U.S., I believe the ground game is going to be state by state. It's going to be company by company. We have a foundation called regulation, the Clean Power Plan, that was finalized in 2015. But that Clean Power Plan is the sixth of a series of regulations that were issued in 15. They'll be in court for a period of time. And they provide a foundation on how to manage carbon through 2030. But it's not a regulation that wrestles with the questions I just posed to you. What about nuclear? What about natural gas? What about technological innovation? What about energy efficiency? And so those questions and that approach to setting the vision for electric infrastructure, I believe the ground game is going to be in the states, and as I said, I believe the ground game is going to be in companies. And so those are the very questions that we wrestle with at Duke Energy. We've been here for 100 years, supplying power for this region. And our hope and expectation is that we're a part of this community for 100 more. So we're trying to figure out how to put capital to work in a way that we're proud of, not just through 2030, but through 2035 and 40 and 50, so that we continue to be the economic driver and the partner that all of you expect, because we power your lives and your community. And so let me talk about what's the question of modernization and transformation at Duke Energy, and thereby the question of modernization and transformation here in the Carolinas. And I would say to you, as we think about it at Duke, there are three things in our mind. One is customers are at the center of all of our decision making. Customers care a lot about what we do, and customers care a lot about value. The second guiding principle is diversity. We do not want to put all of our eggs in one basket, because we understand that commodities are volatile. We understand that political sentiments change. And to build a diverse portfolio, just like your investment portfolio, we want to have diversity in that source of generation. And the third guiding principle is engagement. Engagement with stakeholders, engagement in the discussion about where we're going forward. Because we believe we have subject matter expertise and practical application on how the electric system works. It is essential to a conversation about how we modernize and go forward. And so I'd like to talk just for a moment about customers. All of you are customers. I'd love to hear how we do. I actually call us when my power is out to see how we do. Customers are very important to Duke Energy, and those customer expectations are changing. Not only the changes for options and information and data, but they care a lot about where their energy comes from. But not every customer is exactly the same. And I am reminded of this as I go out into our customer community and talk with customers, because we serve everyone within the boundaries of our system. And I will engage with customers from a fixed income or a low income background, and they will say to me, Lynn, the power bill is in the same stack with food and rent. I cannot afford $1 more a month for power. And so what is the value proposition that I offer to that customer as I think about transforming and modernizing? And then when I visit an industrial customer who says my competition is in Alabama and my competition is in Southeast Asia, energy is the second cost driver that makes me competitive, how much more is that customer willing to pay for me to modernize and transform? I have other customers who want all of their power from green energy sources, and they may have a different appetite for how much they want to pay for the price of electricity. And so being really clear about where our customers are situated and how we can deliver value is an important way that we think about transforming and planning for the future. The other thing we spend a lot of time on is technology. And I'm sure as I look around this room at the businesses that are being impacted by technology, what I'm about to say will make sense to you, because technology is everywhere. Every element of the value chain of electricity is being impacted by technology. It's in your home. It's the way we generate electricity. It's the way we deliver electricity. And the technology that we see today is going to continue to transform. It'll be something different in 2020. It'll be something different in 2025. And so at Duke, we take a very disciplined approach to looking at technology. We do a lot of piloting, looking at it on small scale. How does it work? How does it fit? What do we think its useful life is going to be? How quickly will it be obsoleted? And how does it fit with the rest of the portfolio that we own? We've been investing in renewables since 2007, early technologies. We've had wind and solar under development for many years, and we've learned a lot about it. Right now, batteries. We have about 15 to 20% of all batteries that are being deployed on the electric system are on Duke's system, because we're trying to figure out what the potential is. What does the potential hold for batteries to be a part of our system? And so those pilots and that research and that analysis of how that technology works is an important part of our job. The technology will be a part of modernization, but how should we put it to work? And one of the toughest things that we wrestle with is when is it time to take a technology to scale? So I have about 25 million people who count on me every hour of every day for power. There's not much room for experimentation. I can't turn everyone's lights off and say, I've got to modernize this section. Bear with me until we get that up and running. The investment to scale is an important one and one that I need to be thoughtful about, not only for reliability, but also for price. And so what are we investing in at Duke? We're investing in renewables. We have spent almost $5 billion across our system on renewable technologies, both wind and solar. In the Carolinas, $1 billion of investment. North Carolina is the 4th largest installed capacity of solar in the US. And I would suggest that most of that sits on my balance sheet in one form or another, a purchase power contract or an asset that we own. We're a believer in solar. We're a believer in solar as part of a portfolio of generation prepared for the future. We're also investing in natural gas. We believe natural gas is an important part of the portfolio of electricity as we look into the future. The discovery and prevalence of gas, the price of gas, the fact that it has a lower carbon footprint is something that we have continued to explore and invest in over a number of years. We are also investing in infrastructure to make sure that the delivery mechanism for natural gas is available and coming into the areas that we serve. And I think it's important just for a moment to talk about what I mean by a portfolio of generation. And the best way I can illustrate this to you is to talk about winter electricity. So I'm going to talk about when the highest usage on our system is during the winter, the peak usage during the winter. It happens at about 7:15 in the morning. So think about 7:15 in February. I have no solar on my system at 7:15 in February. That doesn't mean I don't love solar and I'm not investing billions in it. But I need a portfolio that can work at 7:15. What works at 7:15? Nuclear works at 7:15. Natural gas works at 7:15. Coal plants work at 7:15. And so having a portfolio that can serve our customers 24/7, uninterrupted, perfect power quality for our industrials is really the objective. And so investing in natural gas is an important part of that responsibility. Continuing to invest in nuclear. I talked about it a moment ago, 40% carbon-free here in the Carolinas. Those plants are really important to the future of this state and to South Carolina as well. We have cared for them over many years to operate them safely and operate them well. We will try to operate them as long as we possibly can. And we are continuing to explore whether or not new nuclear can make sense for this region. I think all of you know it's an expensive and long-range proposition. And when I talk about the lack of an energy policy and a conversation about where nuclear fits, I can tell you how difficult that decision is, but one that we will wrestle with over the next few years as we receive a commercial operating license for new nuclear. And then the final thing that we're investing in is the grid itself. This grid, which has provided great reliability for all of us, was built for one thing, for me to generate power and deliver it to you. And I look at a world where there will be rooftop solar, there'll be small generation in different places, there'll be colleges and universities who want to have generation on their campuses, and instead of me controlling all the generation, there's going to be generation everywhere. The grid was not designed to take the power that way. I need to maintain quality. I need to invest in the grid so it's prepared for that future. And so as I think about transformation for Duke, it's an exciting time. Customers at the center, investment in technologies that we think make sense, and then finally engagement and with our stakeholders. And Clean Power Plan will give us a great opportunity to do that. It's front and center over the next couple of years. Having those tough questions and answer periods about what we really want for the future of the electric infrastructure in the Carolinas. And Duke welcomes the opportunity to play a leadership role in that discussion, because what we're talking about is the livelihood not only of ourselves and the economies that we have responsibility for today, but also for the economy and livelihoods of our children and grandchildren. And we want them to enjoy flipping the switch with great reliability and affordability into the future. And so that's my lap around the world on power, global, country, Duke, the Carolinas. And you know, I'm delighted to see students here because I think the students are going to have a role to play in continuing to innovate and take this challenge into the next generation. I would encourage you to get behind the headlines. This is hard stuff that requires trade-offs and practical application of how to keep the lifeblood of a community working at the same time you're modernizing. And I think about the role that Duke has played with that very same assignment over the last 100 years. And the company actually began by harnessing the Catawba River and developing hydro stations to enliven a textile industry here in the Carolinas, and was important in building infrastructure that we still use today and benefit today and really grew the region that we're a part of. So we are honored to serve North and South Carolina. We're honored to be in this industry. We're excited about what the future holds. We think there's great promise around innovation and new technologies. We think customers have to be at the center of what we do, and we're anxious to have the conversations necessary to wrestle with the decisions that are so important to get it right. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I think we have some time for questions.
Thank you, Lynn, for your comments and insight. We will now move to the portion of the event today where we ask Lynn for questions from the audience.
I was pretty excited when you bought the local gas company, and I was wondering if Duke is considering fuel cells as part of your transmission.
Working with teammates at Piedmont Natural Gas, I think it's going to be a terrific combination. And fuel cells are being studied both at Piedmont and at Duke. We're looking forward to ways we can share research. I know EPRI, who I didn't mention earlier, but also an important part of the energy cluster, is also looking at fuel cells. So that's another, horizon of potential technological breakthrough.
Hi, Lynn. This is Shiba Bhamik from SignWatch. Thank you for carrying us through your vision and your leadership in providing the stability and the grid integration and of different resources onto the grid. My question is more along the lines of the business model of utilities. So, as you know, and you mentioned at the very end of your talk, that when power starts flowing both ways, the grid was not designed to handle that. I believe, there's more deeper and far-reaching implications on that, namely on the business model aspect. When power starts flowing, I think cash flow also starts flowing in both directions. So take us into your boardroom and the conversations that you have with your execs and your board members. What is the future of the utilities, and how are you going to monetize the bidirectional flow of cash?
Just as the electric system was built for me to generate and deliver to you, there is a regulatory model that supported that in order for me to earn a fair return on the investment necessary for that to happen. And so what I would suggest to you is that there are all kinds of studies going on all around the U.S. and really around the world on the notion of business model. There have been some failed experiments. I think we're kind of suffering through some of those experiments here in the U.S. So there's no perfect solution to that. And what I would suggest, again, is that engagement of stakeholders and discussion about where we want to go with the power system and with the investment necessary to make that happen is the kind of conversation we need to have in all of our jurisdictions. And when I think about the Carolinas, we have enjoyed an extraordinarily favorable economic value proposition for power, 20 to 30% below the national average. It hasn't been all bad and wrong here in the Carolinas. So if we can build on that and take advantage of the new technologies and come up with pricing structures that attract investment in order for that to happen, that'll be a win. I don't think there's a silver bullet to this, however. I think it's going to be something that has to really be wrestled with within the context of where we're trying to go for policy.
A quick question on the Paris Climate Conference, if you can give us your quick view on that, and also what's happening in the energy market as you see it.
Paris was an important milestone. 195 countries coming together, setting objectives about how to take carbon out of the global economy. But as I said a moment ago, the hard work, big homework assignment came after Paris in order for each country to really grapple with how they're going to go forward. And so the whole notion of how we tackle reducing carbon and also tackle economic growth and investment and pricing to customers is really where I believe the challenge will be. And so in the U.S., the framework is the Clean Power Plan, but the conversation in the states need to be much broader than that on where we're going to go with electric infrastructure. And so, you know, as I look at the U.S. in particular, I think gas is going to play an important role. I think renewables will play an important role. I think energy efficiency will play an important role. Every appliance you buy uses less energy than the one you take out. I think that's a good thing. I think energy efficiency is actually very strong for our country. And then I hope nuclear becomes a part of the conversation at the right time when we recognize the importance of that resource. And you know, we are building 4 nuclear units in the U.S. We operate 99 today. We are retiring them faster than we're building them. And we're losing pace with China. I believe China has 25 units under construction. And in not too distant future, there will be a change in the global landscape on who the leader is around nuclear power. And my hope and expectation is we can sort that out as a country and figure out how we're going to put nuclear into the mix.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. You mentioned that the shutdown of coal-fired plants is a problem for your company. I was wondering whether you have considered to change from coal to alternative fuel. For example, the black pellets, which is a new development where we have the big advantage that we are sitting in the southeast here in abundant fuel, raw material. It just has to be changed into the pellets in order to have the right density of energy to be efficient in the coal-fired plant.
I spoke a moment ago about Duke's leadership in modernization. We have closed half of our coal units over the last 5 to 7 years. As we looked at the economics of the regulations and the future of carbon and coal generation, et cetera. So what we operate today is about 25% of our system is coal, and those coal units are very clean. We've made a lot of investments around environmental standards, and we will, you know, continue to make investments. I do believe, though, over time, as we wrestle with Clean Power Plan, we'll be retiring more coal. And what we've been doing as part of retirement of coal is building natural gas and adding renewables to our system. And so one of the things I would like to learn about the pellets is how does it stand up against the carbon rules? Because one of the things I didn't talk about is that in addition to the Clean Power Plan, EPA issued rules last year that are so stringent on production of carbon that I do not believe there will be any new coal plants built in the U.S. And the repowering of coal for other sources would have to fit within certain environmental constraints. So coal is under a lot of pressure from a number of different directions, and so we'd have to evaluate it within that context. One of the values of the infrastructure around a coal plant, if we can power it, is it can be really cost effective because you've got all that transmission and substation and infrastructure around it. And so if we can use a brownfield site for a different fuel source or for natural gas, it's quite cost competitive for customers.
Thank you so much, Ms. Good, for such a stimulating lecture. My question is, in eastern North Carolina, we have a Marcellus Shale that has been proven to have a lot of natural gas plus noble gases such as helium, et cetera. My question to you is, ma'am, can you see at some point the possibility of your company participating in harvesting this gas at some point in time? And second, is it realistic for your company to possibly participate in adding to the infrastructure for bringing out these different gases on the Marcellus Shale that we have? Thank you.
You know, if you think about natural gas, you know, there's a value chain on natural gas from exploration and harvesting the gas to delivery and consumption. I'm a big consumer. So Duke is the second largest consumer of natural gas in the U.S. And so our investment has been around infrastructure and around ensuring we have adequate supply as a consumer. Duke Energy, anyone who's a stockholder, expects me to show up with a 70 to 75% dividend, which is my honor to do. And I try to do that every quarter. We'll do that every quarter. And that's really inconsistent with the risk of exploration and commodity risk. So we have not invested in the exploration and the commodity itself, but more in infrastructure. And in fact, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline that we announced a little over a year ago runs right down the I-95 corridor into eastern North Carolina, and not only provides a very diverse delivery set of assets for our benefit, but I think for the eastern part of the state and for what industry may develop in that area, to have that infrastructure is really valuable. So we look forward to a lot of growth in eastern Carolina around Atlantic Coast Pipeline.
What is Duke doing in terms of trying to preserve water, in terms of trying to encourage the circular economy, taking in consideration that 40% of the current water withdrawals are for energy production in the USA?
If you think about the water around this area, the Catawba River, Lake Norman, Lake Wiley, all of them play a role, not only in the recreation and enjoyment of the community, but also in the generation of power. And so we have a lot of attention to ensuring that we use water wisely, that we recycle water, that we are attentive to how much water use, that we minimize water use. And I would love to get more information for you. There's probably information on our portal around water use because it's so front and center for us. But my colleagues here at Duke would be delighted to give you more specifics on how we're approaching it here in the Catawba River Basin. But I would say to you, it's a very high priority. And as we look ahead on water planning and scarcity and where generation needs to go and how it should fit within that complex, it's front and center in our decision making.
What kinds of projections are you making in terms of energy needs over that same span of time?
So we're experiencing lots of growth in number of customers, 1 to 1.5% year over year in the Carolinas. But usage per customer is only slightly positive. Peak usage is continuing to grow. And so we are planning for about 1% growth into the future. But I would say to you, we look at that every year to understand all of the dynamics that I talked about on technologies and energy efficiency and home sizes and, are more people living in an urban area versus a suburban area? All of those things influence where we need power, how much power, and when. And so the forecasting around population and energy usage is something we do a lot of, but the industry does as well. And I appreciate that question so much because when we think about building infrastructure, we're not trying to solve the problem for 2016. It takes years to put this stuff in place. I'm trying to solve it for 2020 and 2025 and 2030. And so that challenge about what we believe about the future and how much capital we put to work to meet those needs is really where we spend a lot of time and try to wrestle with those projections. And scenario plan around them. How right or wrong could we be about where we're going?
Since Toyota has committed to hydrogen as the future of their automobile train, and since in my area, trains also are beginning to develop hydrogen as a fuel going forward, that's going to put Duke in the business of being a transportation provider, including collecting road taxes. Is there a market? Is there a market plan for that? And is there anything about it that you could disclose?
We believe there's a lot of electrification potential, and transportation is a key element of that. Whether you talk about rail, or you talk about cars, or you talk about ports, and other forms of transportation. And so it is something that we look at. And as I think about the question on forecasting usage, how quickly we electrify those other modes of transportation will be an important part of that. And so we are looking at it. We think electrification makes a lot of sense for transportation, and it's part of our planning for 2020, 2025, and beyond.
Thank you so much for your presentation and talking about the intricacies of all power along. But I want to turn this over more of a personal level. I know we have some kids that are here concerning your role and how you've gotten to your position. Just explain a little bit of that hard work that you've done and the dedication you've taken with your family and your career to get to the position.
There was no linear approach from college to CEO of Duke Energy. It was a series of moves that were difficult for me to predict. And I think about in 2002, I was an Anderson partner And anyone who was an Anderson partner knows that that all disappeared in the space of about 2 months. So we started at ground zero in May of 2002. And then I was at Deloitte & Touche for a year. Then I went to Synergy for 2 years. I'm sitting at my desk at Synergy, noticing along with the rest of the employees that they had merged with Duke. Here we go. I'm from Cincinnati, so I had an opportunity once again. So I would call the decade of the 2000s the whitewater decade, because I had a hard time getting myself situated on where I wanted to work. But the common thing for me throughout my career has been to work really hard and be really enthusiastic about whatever I'm given to do and give it my very best. And I've had the privilege of working with extraordinary organizations who are willing to give me extraordinary work that I could work very hard at. And the constant in all of that has been Brian Good, John and Michael, my family. And when you go through turmoil of any sort in your life, I think all of you would agree that connection to family is what makes it all possible. And so I was, delighted to hear Gary talk about work-life balance. To me, Brian, John, and Michael are first, always will be. And fitting the rest of the important things that I want to do around it is the way I think about it. I'm not, Duke Energy. I love Duke Energy, but I love Brian Good and John and Michael. And so I think that proper perspective about your career and where it fits and where happiness comes from is important. But there's no substitute for hard work and passion about what you do, and give it your best.
What steps have been taken to limit another coal ash spill and clean up the coal ash ponds?
I'm really delighted to answer a question about Dan River. It's had a profound impact on Duke Energy, and I don't want to make light of it in any way, because you expect more from us, I expect more from us. And we have spent the last 2 years sweeping through our operation from the beginning to end to raise the standard of expectation and really to reduce any risk of any issue of that type throughout our system. And I'm proud of how Duke has responded. We responded quickly and comprehensively and have continued to demonstrate our commitment to the environment and to the community. And so we are well on our way. This year alone, we will move 6 million tons of ash out of our basins into other areas, landfills and other sites, and we will continue on that march, of course, ensuring safety of drinking water and groundwater along the way. So our commitment to the safety of our communities is unwavering. This is our home, and we want to get this right. So thank you for that question.
I was wondering if Duke has been investing in small modular reactor designs at all, and if so, how soon in the near future might we see one of them?
We participated in an industry consortium looking at this technology and continue to stay in tune with it or monitoring its development, but have not made any material investments. I think it's something, as we talk about the conversation of nuclear for the future, that we should evaluate. There is no protocol to license a small modular reactor in the U.S., and it has not been developed for commercial use at this point, and so a lot of R&D needs to go in that direction. So I would look at that as a solution for next decade or beyond. But the benefit of it is it's small, it can be added in smaller chunks, and hopefully could be a part of the solution for the future.
On behalf of the World Affairs Council, we're presenting to Lynn a certificate from the World Affairs Council of Charlotte.